Hi there and welcome to this Business Day 4.0 live in partnership with Clickatell and Triple4. I'm Joanne Joseph. It's a pleasure to have you along as we discuss how to digitally transform and enable your business in the current climate. Now, we're having this conversation, especially because the COVID-19 lockdown has become the catalyst for thousands of businesses to evaluate their product offerings and, of course, to build new business models and systems. Many businesses have found that running manual processes with paper-based transactions is becoming less feasible when employees are working remotely and when customers are choosing to shop online. So how should you respond to this as a business owner? If you're feeling slightly intimidated by making this transition, don't be. We've assembled a panel of experts today to talk you through what changes can be made and how that can be done, how these can be implemented, and we'll be speaking to exactly the people who are there to help you make this transition. Now, before I introduce the panel, let me just remind you to please make use of the live chat function at the side of your live screen. You're welcome to post your questions there, and you can also specify if you'd like a particular panelist to answer your question in particular, but I'll come to that in just a short while. Let me introduce our panel next. I'm going to start with Casper. He is one of the co-founders of Clickatell, a groundbreaking company that created a world-first 4 lines of code that created a way to send an SMS from the internet to cell phones. Casper is SVP of Data, Compliance and Shared Services Operations at Clickatell. The company is based in South Africa, but it's now expanded into several developing countries and around the world. Kevin Mortimer is CEO at Triple4. His career in IT spans more than 2 decades. Kevin has been involved in all aspects of the industry. He co-founded the company in 2007, and he's been focused on growing and expanding the business since, taking sole ownership of it into 2019. Kevin describes himself as being obsessed with being more than just enough, making it his daily mission to review and improve on yesterday. That's probably good advice for us all, Kevin. And Alison Jacobson, a pleasure to be able to interview you again after a few months. She's director of the Field Institute and previously group principal digital strategist for the Dimension Data Group. She works with senior leadership to navigate the future of work and strategic change. She's also a thought leader on emerging technology, having published several articles in academic journals and spoken on many digital leadership platforms. Now, with an extensive background in digital consulting and software development, Alison's pioneered various industry-first solutions, and she's coaching executives globally in digital transformation and emerging technology by shifting focus to the application of these principles and the tools that are necessary to enable new business models and sustainable competitiveness. So we've really got a great panel for you this morning, and I welcome all of you and thank you for making yourselves available to speak to us today. And Casper, let me start with you. Would you just give us a sense of how much commerce has moved online in South Africa in general in recent years?
So I believe not everyone will know this, but just in 2020, we have had a whopping 21.9 million users using online purchasing in South Africa only. Not everyone realized the extent and the size of the market for online, but that was more than $4 trillion just in 2020. So we all know the reality of COVID, we all know the reality of online, but I don't think we realize to what extent it has not just been a convenience move towards online, it has been a mind shift change towards online. And for me, that was the barrier only. Once people get used to it, I believe it's gonna spike and it's gonna grow, and people are gonna realize the convenience of online. So I believe, although there's only a 9.2% growth estimated from between now and 2023, I believe it might even exceed that as people realize the convenience of online shopping. So I believe it's just the start of it. But as you know, if you can think of accessing a market of 22 million people, it's definitely the way to go.
That number is quite phenomenal. Given what you've just told us in view of the numbers, how quick have South African companies been to adopt digital trends in recent years, Casper?
Much too slow, unfortunately. So there's some banks, as example, that started offering their services through chat commerce, through chat apps, etc. So I believe there's a lot of movement. But if you look at the market size, if you look at the opportunities and the efficiencies to do things online versus just physical, I believe it's too slow. And I think the main reason was that fear of what will it take? How would I do this? I've got a physical parcel. How would I do that? But if you guys just think about 69% people visiting retail shops less now with COVID, and realize those people are now online, right? That they don't want to buy it. I believe that the main reason was that they just didn't know how to do it. But with the likes of, if I may mention a few star performers, with the likes of ShopRite with their 60/60 and the ease of just ordering something. I've tried a few other options. It was not as easy, but they made it easy. That right supply chain, so that the right guys and scooters that arrived in 60 minutes. If you look at Absa Bank, just making banking easier with the chat banking. Take-a-Lot's always been good with delivery, right? So for me, yes, there's dependencies, but I believe it's the few that managed to look beyond and said, okay, step by step, you digitize this and you move forward. Then this, then this. You don't have to solve it all at once. So I believe not enough. There's a lot of movement. I think COVID gave everyone that push that we needed, right? And that's more digital in terms of your operational efficiencies. It gave us that push to say, okay, move, now go. And I think now that people realize, well, this thing is quite possible, I think we'll see more. But I think businesses are losing out on an opportunity to be more digital. And we hope today that we can give them that nudge and some ideas on how to do that better.
Kevin, let me bring you in here because we've chatted outside of this forum about the massive shift that COVID was for so many of these companies, right? Many companies were, as Casper says, very slow in adopting this technology, but COVID was make or break for many of these companies. And I take it that many of them were left scrambling unless they had some sort of plan in place.
Yeah, so it was because of the speed at which it arrived, the pandemic on the shores, and really just forced everyone to have to make a plan. And there's one thing that's pretty well documented about South Africans is we're great at making a plan when it's needed. But if you hadn't put some of the most basic building blocks in place at the beginning of this, and it's maybe an unpopular opinion, but if this was ever going to happen, this year was probably the best year to make it happen. Can you imagine if we'd had a global pandemic like this now, where the technology wasn't there to enable us to do this? So companies that already had considered cloud, had some good recovery and continuity strategies in place. If you were in manufacturing and had some kind of robotics automation or IoT in place, you were already in a position where responding to this was a lot easier. If this had been in, say, 2001, where we were running around with Nokias, and we would be going mad playing Snake at home with no ability to do anything, right? So the timing was good, although you can never say anything like this is good. But those that didn't do this were the ones that were probably too skeptical of the modern advances around things like cloud and around IoT, and we're going, well, business is good, why mess with it if it's broken? And we're getting by, and they're sweating older assets. Those are the guys that were left high and dry. But the ones that had made an effort to keep up to date with leading edge, not necessarily bleeding edge technology, and they were implementing the right things and engaging with correct thought leaderships and minds and being prepared for it, they were the ones that made the switch relatively easily. And I think that's the companies that have really struggled are the ones that didn't do that. And it's a sad reality, unfortunately.
And I think what you're probably alluding to there partly as well is the kind of structured manner in which one needs to go about this, Kevin. I have the sense that if you didn't have a kind of structure in place, that making this shift could have been fairly traumatic for business owners and their employees. What facilitates a comfortable transition, Kevin?
Yeah, so it starts right at the highest layer of an organization. You've got to have a leadership layer that is forward thinking and open to new suggestions, and especially not sort of prone to going like, I have all the answers, because let's be honest, not every single person on the planet has all the answers. I certainly don't have the answers outside of my field. And it's being open to that and working constantly on your strategy and going, where's the business needing to be, talking to other industry minds to understand what is coming down the line, what emerging technologies are there, all of these kind of things, and having those conversations and then factoring them into your plan. Not just going, oh, we probably won't need that, and then just ignoring it. So being aware of what's coming and working with that at a structured level, and then preparing your organization for that change. So for example, there's a concept that we've been using for ages in Triple4 where we talk about the voices in a business. So these voices in the business are people that carry influence and indirect influence with the rest of the company and the people in it. And you want to be engaging with multiple layers, telling them, this is coming down the line. This is where we're going to go. These are the benefits for you. So the industry calls that change management, but the practicality of it around is just communicating with the people that are your stakeholders and enable you. As you're preparing them for that, you're really just smoothing the transition and the journey, because as the technology arrives, as the changes arrive, they're prepared for it. And in most cases, they've embraced that as well because they're seeing the benefits. You're not just going, here you go, drop. You'll survive.
I imagine, though, it must have been pretty terrifying for some businesses that were caught completely off guard. What would have happened in the kind of situations, Kevin, where call center agents, for example, had to work from home? They essentially had to move a mobile office into their home. The technology was not there. Perhaps the internet access was not there. How did those companies cope during this COVID?
So varying degrees of success. So we've seen that, and we've even tried to reach out to a couple of the companies in the earlier days of the lockdowns where, we picked up that if you called their call center, literally you would get an automated voice message to say, please email us and we'll get back to you in 48 hours. And with the world the way it is, where everything is on instant response, talking about online and immediate response, that's just not good enough in this day and age anymore. So that's a classic example of a company that just got it wrong. Other companies that had already implemented technologies like cloud PBXs, voice over IP, contact centers that were already in the cloud, all the CRM systems, all the data is already accessible and secured. They were able to make this transition quite easily. But where the call center agents, for example, don't have connectivity, this is where we're obviously hoping that the 5G rollouts will have a massive impact on taking connectivity into the homes that don't have access right now. They've had to make other plans, for example, go in and bash out walls and increase the size of their call center real estate. Others ended up forwarding calls from their PBX systems to the cell phone numbers at massive cost to business. And when you look at those kind of forwarding costs, you go, wow, you guys could have spent a fraction of that on actually being up to date with your strategy and putting in the right technologies, and you probably would have walked out of this in a clean way.
So Alison, I mean, you're also the voice of reason here when it comes to being able to assess whether you're the kind of company that ought to make the digital transition, what measures it ought to take, whether it should just rush in there and convert, as many companies are now feeling the pressure to do. So give me a sense of this. I think it's fairly important to note that businesses should take note of what ought to be transformed digitally and what ought not to in their businesses, particularly depending on the kind of business they own. Alison?
So I think that it's an interesting word that you use, and it's very appropriate. You say, what ought we to do? What choices should we make? Because it's always a trade-off in terms of the kinds of things that Kevin's describing. Is we move when we need to move, and when do you perceive you need to move? And is it ahead of the crisis, or is it at the point of crisis? And I think that there are different types of pressures and different types of people. If you think that this the broadly speaking digital is optional, I think you're wrong today. I don't think it's optional. I think that the notion of having a digitally literate business and deciding what aspects of digital are appropriate for you and for your market is the decision that needs to be taken. But should we be digitizing our businesses and transforming? I don't even think that's a question any longer. It doesn't mean we all have to start going into an e-commerce kind of mode, although one can see the impact of that for companies like ShopRite, Checkers. But what we're basically looking for is how can we do business better? And I don't think anybody would ever say, no, we shouldn't do business better. I think that's the question. Should we do business better? Should we be more efficient? Should we get more done with less? Should we offer a better service to our customers? Should we try and attract more customers? Should we do more to retain our customers? If we've got customers, should we try sell more to them? I mean, these are sort of inarguable. So then the answer becomes, how best do we do those things today? And of course, we're in 2021 almost. So how best is, well, technology is going to be a significant part of that answer. So it's no longer even should businesses and which businesses. There is something for everyone here. And even if it means you are completely shop front based and you're physical bricks and mortar, or you're running a hotel, and sort of COVID aside and the major crises that prevail in our sector. But if you're running any kind of business, if you're running a school, if you're running a catering company, is there room for improvement? Would you like to get more done with less? And this is what technology is about, if it's done well, is essentially, can you get more done with less? And obviously, the question then becomes, where should I pinpoint my efforts? And to me, what's happened with COVID as an accelerant, which it obviously has been, is that the customer has shifted. So customers no longer want to go to shops, or we can't go to shops. We don't want to get into crowded spaces. So if you think about it from that point of view, that the actual behavior of customers has shifted, and the businesses that survive and thrive will be able to be resilient and responsive to these new behaviors. That's actually what we're talking about. So let's put aside the issue of the technology. Let's say, are you a business that can move quickly to respond to the change in behavior of customers? And again, sorry, go for it.
So well, I was going to say, now just to play devil's advocate here, there are many businesses that would answer no to that. They would say, I want my business to grow. Of course I do. But I find particularly with family businesses, we've got different generations in the business. You've got some elderly people who are still running the business. And they find this technology fairly intimidating. They don't know what, from a practical point of view, it will mean for them to start transforming a business that's service-oriented, like hospitality or manufacturing companies.
Yes, so that's probably, the biggest barrier to change is sort of fear and ignorance, generally speaking, and a sort of inertia where we say, but this is how we've always done it, which is obviously the sort of the death knell of innovation. So if we say this is how we've always done it, why is COVID an accelerant? Because suddenly the wheels came off, and this is not how we've always done it. And therefore, anybody who had a sort of responsiveness within themselves and a resilience and a digital literacy, in other words, they're not afraid of the technology, they're prepared to explore it. Because Kevin said it, even though we're all experts in this field, I can assure you we don't know everything. It's moving so quickly. But what it means to be an expert in this field is that you may be not afraid to continue learning. So I have to say, and it's an unfortunate statement, I think, but as an example, when Disney decided that it wanted to go digital, they brought in a bunch of very young people onto their board. And if you are in a business where you don't have a feeling of comfort and even excitement and curiosity, then you're going to have to bring in people who do, in some form or another, whether that's consultants or board members or family members or whatever the case is. But you can't come at this from the vantage point of, I don't trust it, I don't like it, I don't understand it. You're never going to be able to sort of do what you need to get done. So it comes from a very personal perspective. And Joanne, you've heard me talk to this. Obviously, I'm a sort of technologist, but it's only about the personal perspective, because the technology doesn't sort of bring itself to bear. You have to transform. You have to become, and in so saying, you can see the massive transformation that most of us have undertaken over the years with digital banking, with online banking. Would any of us seek to now go into branches? And in that, I include my mom, who's 78. She goes to a bank branch when she absolutely has to, and she resents it at every step, because online banking, the same is true, with Casper saying 60-60. It's faster for them to deliver groceries than it is for me to go to the store and pick it up myself, faster and cheaper. And so if you feel that this is something that you're really afraid of, you have to take steps. You have to go and learn, or you have to bring on people who are less afraid.
I think that is a pivotal point that you're making, Alice. It really is. And I think your 70-odd-year-old mum would have seen the benefit of doing that, especially during COVID now. We start to see the kind of practical practical advantages, not just on a day-to-day basis, but also when there's a huge life-changing event that we've just experienced. Casper, you wanted to add something to that?
So I assume the audience will be a mixed audience between physical goods and non-physical goods, online goods. So for the audience that's not delivering a parcel, if you think of online and you're hesitant and you're scared and you're not sure where to go, I think you should put a number on your fridge of 1.9 billion potential customers. That's a number of people in the world that buys online. That's apart from the 21.9 million that I mentioned for South Africa, which is also a significant number. So those two numbers alone, if it's services you offer and you can somehow find that way to do it digitally transform, those are the numbers that you can chase, because suddenly your market opens. And as Alison said, you don't have to know how, you don't have to know what to do, right? There's people that do that for you. There's people that's been there, done that, and that can easily look at your business and give you an indication of, consider this. They can give you bite-sized solutions. Some of MTN previously just sold airtime through the standard channels, and then suddenly started selling airtime through WhatsApp. Suddenly, I don't need to download anything. I can just go to my address book, my normal chat service, and I can go buy airtime. Same as your grandmother, that she said that suddenly she can do online banking. Imagine I can just WhatsApp pay my gardener, done, and it's sorted. Suddenly you have those markets to live up for, and I agree, no time to be scared, because all it's going to give you is going to be easier, it's going to be more cost effective, you're going to reach more people, you're going to sell more. So like people putting their goals on the fridge, those should be the ones that we are chasing.
Casper, you made a good point there about chat commerce. I want to come back to that. Kevin, what would you like to add?
Yeah, so on the topic of managing the fear and managing the process of adoption is there's tools and mechanisms and toolbox little things that we can run and that organizations run, where you can manage resistance and you can identify what is the actual reason for your resistance, and you can work around that. None of these hurdles are insurmountable, and in most cases where we've seen the best successes, where you're actually what we're calling, you force a generational convergence. So you're going like, well, let's stop with the labels and millennials versus boomers versus X versus Zoomers versus everyone, and you just go, let's converge all of these, because we've all got strengths that we can bring to the party. You can bring wisdom, we can bring the tech, we can bring everything, we can bring it all together, and then we can measure the resistance and then go and say, well, that's where we need to focus. And then you can break it down into bite-sized chunks, like Casper mentioned. There's a graph that gets used. It's a cross graph. It's used in almost every aspect of business analytics, where you go business impact versus ease of implementation, and you can very quickly identify the quick wins, and that already starts you on the journey of going digital. The really complex stuff you can leave at the end, but you'll find that quick wins probably account for 40 to 50% of your business. And just by optimizing and creating efficiencies in that, you're already improving the bottom line and you're already creating growth. So it's not a case of let's identify the most complex process in your business and start there, because that becomes a forever, right? And let's just identify the quick wins. Let's start small. Let's show the success that we're going to have by doing these little quick things. You almost sell that concept to the rest of the business, to the people that are showing resistance, because suddenly they, things are more effective. And that's really what I wanted to add in there.
So you see, I think that's a little different to the perception that many people have, Alison, that this is going to be a very expensive exercise from a financial point of view, but also that it might result in job losses if we move towards technology rather than using people to do the same work. Is that not a recurrent fear in your area, Alison?
The fear of job loss. Yes. Unfortunately, I mean, it's we are in very strange times. I want to just sort of come back to something that Casper raised and Kevin was talking to, and then talk about what this means in terms of skills and people. And Casper said, we're not just talking about sort of e-commerce. In other words, I've got a business, I need to ship a parcel, let me do it now on the web or on a phone. What we're talking about in terms of digital transformation is that you might want to transform your finance system. You may want to do electronic invoicing. You may want to do electronic document signing, which has suddenly become a very, very big deal with COVID. But obviously some companies have been doing that for years, where instead of, and this is, the technologies existed for years, and yet we've seen physical paper being passed around still in South Africa from our banks and insurers. Now things have become electronic, and somehow one can just see what this means in terms of efficiency. If you've ever had the experience of being sent an electronic document by your insurer, it's marvelous. I mean, relative to what we had to do before. So across your entire business, there are probably efficiencies to be had by working better, working more electronically. And it's not that complicated. And there are many fairly low cost, highly available solutions if you're not afraid. And if you are completely clueless and afraid, which I can understand and I totally respect, because we're all coming from different points of view and different experiences. If you feel too afraid to do this, you should find somebody to speak to. And it doesn't have to be a consultant. You should speak to a younger person in your family. And I really mean that. And sort of get them involved in taking you one step along the journey. Because if you do that and it actually saves you money, you can use that saving to do more. And you can start at a point which has less resistance and where there's a more obvious need. And like Kevin said, you don't have to go and suddenly stop being what you are and suddenly you're sort of trying to be Amazon. You can try and take on your business as it is and look for what one area might I try, experiment with. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. We'll go back to our manual processes. But can I try something? Maybe it's in your supply chain. Maybe it's in your manufacturing process that you want to introduce some new technologies. One of the guys was talking about Internet of Things and predictive analytics. It doesn't have to be sort of so full-blown and costly. There are more commoditized solutions available, and especially in places like HR, and especially in places like sort of finance management and back office management. But it's not only the case, as per Casper, that you've now got access to potentially 1.9 billion people if you sell online. If you move to a more online kind of business model and you have a more distributed remote workforce model, even if you do still have a physical head office and we move back to that, you potentially have access to X billion people who you could bring on to work for you. And what we're seeing in a big way, and this is where I'm coming to the workforce element and the skills, etc., is that if you're prepared to go even a little bit more remote and say, look, this COVID thing taught me that we can get stuff done on Zoom, right, or on WhatsApp or whatever the case is, it might mean that you now have a talent pool, which is the whole world, to go and hire from. And we're seeing that in a very, very, very big way, is that people aren't moving back and saying, I have to hire geographically from people who live within 50 kilometers of my office. You could now hire globally. And it's a real flattening and it's a real leveling, which is being really sort of taken very far through this COVID experience. But of course, it's what's been done by the big tech companies for many years. But we're starting to see that more and more with other types of companies, that you could be running some kind of manufacturing service, but maybe your finance manager is sitting somewhere else in the world if it's all being done remotely. So we're seeing that. And we're seeing that instead of saying, we don't have the skills, actually, there are many more skills on the world stage. However, what does that mean for people who don't have these capabilities, who are not able to access the internet, have the data to do so consistently in terms of costs? And not everyone's going to be a programmer or a technologist. I'm talking about finance managers, HR managers, debtor clerks, etc. It's people across the board that could suddenly be working on an online system in a distributed way. So I see that happening on the one trend in terms of skills, is this opening up. And then, of course, in terms of the movement away from a lot of what has been done manually, where you'll get the efficiencies from going online, many jobs will be lost. We're seeing that already. Many jobs will be lost. There's no doubt about it. The question is what new jobs will be created and in what numbers, and no one knows the answer to that. We can't posit what these new jobs will look like necessarily very far out. And all I can say to people is you have to take it in your own hands to keep yourself somewhat aware, somewhat upskilled. And there is a huge amount of free resource where you could become slightly more familiar and competent. Like I say, not everyone's going to go off and become a Python programmer, but could you undertake to develop some new skills that would allow you to work as part of these new workforce arrangements? I think the answer is yes. And if you feel you can't, you should be looking for help from professionals or from people who feel that they do have those skills to assist.
Right. Casper, researching this discussion, I was in two minds by the end of it as to whether this progress, the way we perceive it anyway, does result in job losses, or whether it creates creates jobs rather in an economy, I think, in which we desperately need those jobs created. What in your view is the answer to that question?
So I'm an evangelist. So I believe that we will be creating with automation, with transformation, with digitization, with technology and innovation. So the one extremely important component of going digital is innovation. And we've spoken too little about that today, because innovation is completely coupled to the concept of digitizing your business, whether it's goods and services or whether it's just services online. It's completely coupled with it. So my view is, with that boost in innovation, when you go digital, in my view, we create more jobs than what we lose. So if we just think traditionally on a few jobs, car manufacturing, when they got robots, yes, less people had to tighten bolts on a car. But I do believe then suddenly they could make more cars and have more factories and more. So I believe that technology actually creates jobs. It creates jobs in terms of career for the future. And yes, there might be a few people between 40 and 70, I'm not sure what age to mention, where there will be a bit of an impact. But the future will be solid. The future of opportunities, new jobs, and with automation, things move fast and better. With faster and better comes economic growth. And with that comes more job opportunities. So I believe technology is absolutely the fuel for job opportunities. And we should not be too worried about that. We shouldn't look at today and now and those jobs there. We should be looking at literally growing and establishing a base of future jobs, future growth. And I believe will exceed any loss that we experience.
Keeping me with you for a while, and I'm trying to imagine this from a practical point of view, particularly in the context of a company that really needs to make some sort of radical shift, because it's perhaps fallen behind, as Casper told us, over the last few years. That, it simply hasn't kept up digitally, even though the country and the world has been changing. I would imagine the entire supply chain might have to be reimagined. I imagine that there might be having a sense of having to retrain employees, upskill particular employees, move them around from one department to another, which is quite unsettling for a business. How do you go about a complex transition of that nature, Kevin?
So again, the complexity needs to be broken down, and you need to be structured about it. Everything comes down to structure, and everything comes down to bite size. If you just go and you say, this entire department is going to get overhauled completely, and we're giving ourselves a month to do it, and it's just going to fall apart, and you're not going to have the appropriate level of opportunity to reskill. And this kind of speaks to what both Alison and Casper were talking about, is that yes, things change, and yes, there's certain positions that their job function on a day-to-day basis might change. Using, let's say, for example, the accountants as an example, they might have previously manually done a cash book and a trial balance, but now with great integrations, and hopefully we get the legislated open banking coming into South Africa pretty soon, which has been around in Europe forever. Suddenly these things are automated and totally anonymized, and everything can get updated, and they don't need to do that. However, there is still an aspect, because traditionally and most famously, the first thing you automate is the first thing you got to review, because you still need to make human decisions. AI being as clever as it is, the perfect example of AI is all your friends just jumped off a bridge. AI's answer is, I'm going to go do the same thing, right? That's machine learning for you. So there's always going to be some human logic and intervention that needs to come in. And the future reskilled positions are the ones that go, well, I used to do this job manually, therefore I am the best suited to go and review and improve and service and fix. So you might find the guy that was the pro engine assembler at Ford GM is now suddenly the best guy to double check if the tolerances on the automated robots are good. So it's a reskilling and a repurposing of skill that will keep everyone relevant. And one of the first things that we're already starting to see is that cities are getting less congested. You're getting the metropolitan smaller because people are going, well, I don't need to pay top rands to have the smallest apartment possible in Sandton because I don't want to have a long commute. I can look at Heidelberg, or I can look at Bottraffair in the Cape, or I can really travel out because as long as I can get connectivity, I can still do my job, right? So that adds other benefits into the city. You've got less congestion, less pollution. So there's, all in all, the long-term benefits of all of this are there. But to go back to your original question, it is really about putting things into a perspective and bite-sized chunks that you're not going to scare the living daylights out of somebody, and also reframe the scenario and find the upside. And we want to look after everybody that's in the company, but also at the same token, you want to be creating enough of a platform so that the future generations that are coming up through it are entering into the world. So yes, agree, not everyone's going to be a Python developer. Duck typing isn't for everybody, certainly isn't for me, but but there are going to be future applications and new code languages that are coming out. We're seeing new code languages coming out all the time. Most of the people's younger kids these days are growing up in technology, not even with technology. So they're already super comfortable. I mean, I've seen a 3-year-old jam an iPad more convincingly than I could ever, so it's already changing. That mindset is already there. So making these changes now might make a couple of people uncomfortable, but you can reframe that. And most people are prepared to reskill. Alison used the example of her, family member who doesn't want to go into banks. Well, my mom's now a call center operator and she's doing great. And, before that she was a PA. So and she's working on digital technologies, selling, insurances and helping people with annuation funds and everything. And she's nailing it because she's reskilled and she was open-minded to that. And I think that's probably the key, is have an open mind, embrace the technology, embrace the change, because it's good.
You're making such a good point, Kevin, and that brings me to something I want to ask you about, Alison, and that's about the issue of education. We've got all these young, bright, tech-savvy kids coming through the education system right now. But you get the sense that perhaps the education system itself, the kind of syllabi that are being taught at higher learning institutions, even perhaps schools, are not entirely appropriate for the kind of skills the workforce is going to require in this digitally transformed world. Does that need to start changing, Alison?
So it's a very, very big can of worms. I think we all know that. And of course, it's not homogenous. So there isn't an education system in South Africa. So there are parts of South Africa which have the benefit of having, programming classes in there and computer labs. And then there are other parts of South Africa that don't have electricity in their schools or sanitation. So I think we have an immense challenge in this country, because when we're talking about our ability to upskill, reskill, to change careers, our parents, that is not readily available for most of South Africa. And let me say this, in order to upskill, reskill, change career, literacy is probably quite a big dependency. I think you'd all agree, to start going and using some online system. We have a terrible literacy problem in South Africa, never mind computer literacy. I'm not going to go into the details of it because I think that that's far too big a conversation. Suffice it to say, we have a literacy crisis in South Africa. I'm talking about basic reading and comprehension. We have a numeracy crisis in South Africa, where kids are graduating from school without being able to effectively do mathematics, even at a very basic level. We actually have a very small percentage of our school kids who are doing maths at school. A larger number doing mathematical literacy. So any thought about going into the fourth industrial revolution, where you're not numerate and you're not literate, is our challenge. Everyone's saying it's going to be fine. I don't think it's going to be fine, quite honestly, and I'm sorry to be so negative. I don't think it's going to be fine. And I think it's not that it's, are we doing enough? We're absolutely not doing enough. It's moving far too slowly. We're having political battles, we're having turf wars, we've got all kinds of vested interests, and it is hurting the future of our children in South Africa across the board. If we move to the topic of the advantaged kind of schools, the private schools or the high-performing government schools, where they do have access to facilities, they have internet access, they've got computer labs, or the kids are wealthy enough to have their own devices with their parents, even there, I would have a very strong conversation about whether or not we're doing enough, because I think that the curriculum of the future is not yet upon us, and we're still looking at an industrial age model for education, which is very much about retention rather than problem solving and innovation. So memorizing content is, to me, the most hideous and perverse sort of throwback to a previous education system, and yet we still see that that's what it takes to get through matric today. So it's a very, very big topic, Joanne. I think we all know that. But my bottom line answer is that even in very advantaged schools, I'm not sure if enough is being done, although many of them have accelerated tremendously through COVID and are doing all kinds of innovative things. And some of them are very, very imaginative and creative. Very small percentage of our population is benefiting from that. And in the majority of the population, we are still trying to teach for an era which I believe is sort of 200 years past us. And we have a crisis. And of course, I'm a massive proponent of digital, and I have the great fortune of being very experienced in this field, and I get to talk to all kinds of business leaders globally and so on. And it's a global challenge, by the way. It's certainly not South Africa's alone, but I must say we are performing very badly on this front. And although I have the opportunity and the privilege of being able to sort of do this work, I'm extremely concerned, very distressed about what I think is going on at sort of a basic education and even a higher education level in South Africa.
That is such an important conversation to have, Alison, and as you say, such a vast one that I think we need to do it in a separate forum entirely dedicated to education. But it has, as you say, such a massive bearing on digital transformation in this country. I want to bring in some of the questions from our viewers now, because there's some really good questions. The first one, a question from Putela Mieni at Cecil Abrahams, saying, is the use of virtual reality goggles feasible in the museum space? Is it practical to develop an online platform where museums from around the world can upload 3D images of their museums to allow users for a fee access via VR goggles? I read about this a little bit online. I'm not quite sure which one of you would like to answer that question. Kevin, would you like to take that?
Alison, if you'd like to, but I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, we're seeing pretty much every single hardware manufacturer out there going down the augmented reality route. VR is pretty much everywhere as well. And again, we're talking about things like, post-pandemic, people reassessing, do I want crowded spaces? I mean, one of the things that, I love museums, but it puts me off looking at that queue going like, I'm going to be stood out here for the next hour and a half before I can even get to the exhibit. And then I'm going to be wrestling through everybody. So absolutely, I think it makes up a lot of sense. And also on the topic of, museums are places of learning. You're creating greater accessibility to the learning, to the content, to the history, you get museums around future history, and I mean, Space Museum, all of these things. So absolutely, it's very, very valid. And it is something that I believe museums should be considering and investigating.
Casper, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I think everyone wants to say something. I agree, it's an absolute yes. But back to Alison's point of how sad that would be if, again, the rich schools and rich areas gets those goggles. So my view is, if I just think of South Africa, just to start with, and the government and organizations that need to spend their bit in uplifting the community, imagine if all of them would just buy lots of those goggles, lots of internet access abilities for schools. And you can take a poor school in Khayelitsha and give 100 kids the experience of any museum in the world, any aquarium in the world, with voiceovers, etc. I think that'll change the world. And that's just one example. I mean, if anyone would just chat for 5 minutes, you would get an endless list of examples. Even for businesses that want to digital transform, you could walk in a shop and look at the shoes and dresses. Virtual reality is where it's completely virtual. Augmented reality is you can walk around in your home and then see the vacuum cleaner in the corner there, what it would look like. You can look at the curtains and see whether the curtains will look good. The endless opportunities, but again, we have to take care of the areas that can't afford it. We have to take care of internet access and abilities. There's one 5G, one everyone must just promote to make sure we equalize this terrible inequality worldwide, but especially in South Africa.
Just a light-hearted question there, Casper, but do you buy a vacuum cleaner for the corner to look at it?
Those automatic ones, I'm sure they call them, you just switch them on and they just go.
Casper's talking about his robot vacuum cleaner.
Oh, yeah. I'm the class clown, so just excuse me there.
But if I can say, Joanne, because I do think, first of all, it's a great question, and obviously we're all excited about it, so you can see how sort of excited we get about these things. But it's not excited because suddenly there's VR goggles. It's excited about what that might mean for people in terms of access. And I want to just say that in the face of sort of the gloomy comments I made, and certainly the concerns I have, there are pockets of things happening in South Africa where people are being given access from all quarters. There's a tremendous program called Play Africa, which is at Constitution Hill in Johannesburg in town, which is basically a sort of a children's museum, which is winning awards globally for children from the community, from Bromfontein, from Hillbrow, from around, where they're doing all kinds of interesting programs that are giving kids access in ways that they may not have had at home, etc., or their parents may never have had. So there are amazing people and projects in South Africa. We need to be able to sort of put our heads together and try and scale these things, and really look at sort of banding some of this together. I'm involved in a program also that teaches kids between the ages of 7 and 16, not just computer programming, because there are a number of those and it's very important, but also innovation techniques, problem solving, design thinking, critical thinking. Because we think that, as I said, not everyone's going to be a programmer, but we all need to have creative and critical thinking skills. And so we're involved in those programs in a non-profit capacity. And we've recently run a program with 30 children aged 13 in very rural Limpopo and in Palm Ridge, with a number of different partners that we banded together with. And over a series of 5 weeks, we introduced these kids online on Zoom. They went to computer centers that were participating and partnering with us, community computer centers. We introduced them to design thinking, which is a problem-solving technique. And I think, if I can say, I think these kids absolutely thrived. They loved the opportunity, and the stuff that they came out in the end was mesmerizing. The amount of creativity, the energy, how they sort of woke up in terms of their own enthusiasm and confidence from the first week to the last of the sessions. Initially, they were shy. They'd never used Zoom before. Some of them hadn't really used computers. By the end of it, they were laughing and talking and sharing their ideas, and they loved meeting each other online. And one of the skills we were trying to impart there was also the skill that we're all practicing, which is, can you get together online with a group of people you don't know, because we don't know each other, and have a meaningful conversation? That's the future of work. And we were taking those kids through a similar kind of journey. So I just want to say there are amazing projects underway in South Africa and amazing points of light. And hopefully we can work together to scale those.
I love the idea of that, Alison, especially with all the problem solving that's required in our country. You know, you get those young minds engaged at an early age, and of course they start taking into account their context, and that's where the problem solving begins, which I think is
absolutely.
I want to, because we're running out of time now, we have so many questions, but I want to ask this question. It was a comment actually from Butela Nieni that potentially I think leads to a very good question. Essentially, Butela is saying the 419 scams in the past might be a contributing factor to the general mistrust of offline transactions. Would you agree with that? I mean, the thought occurred to me while all of you were speaking. You know, that with everything going digital, most transactions going digital now, what about the fears of hacking and other security issues that come with that? Surely companies are slightly held back by that, Casper?
So I'm very glad we didn't forget to mention the word security. I don't believe, I believe for the more traditional older crowd, 419's kind of major hesitant. But I believe for the majority, I personally don't think that'll influence. I think people just fraud in general. Yes, people are very hesitant, but for that now come solutions. One example is where if I can use the example of WhatsApp again, where with WhatsApp you make your payment with iPay, with Google Pay. So the payment methods has changed where that reduces the risk and the liability. So for me, I believe it'll influence, but the speed at which commerce and chat commerce and online commerce is growing, I believe that's too fast for that to influence. So no, I don't believe I believe it's an influencer, but very small. But the mechanisms, the technology behind payments, the way the payment processors now make it easy for you, and you can now have a wallet, you don't have to use your card. So I'm comfortable with PayPal as example, and they've got my card. So when I pay, I don't pay with my card, I pay with PayPal, and they do all the checks and balances. I believe there's ways to overcome that. And yes, it'll influence, but not overtake or overtake.
On that topic, I can add to that is, I mean, the one thing that what we must realize is that mistrust and being skeptical about something is good, because it means you're going to double check things, right? If you just blindly take faith in it, then you're not going to double check it. But on the flip side is, even before you had digital, you still had fraud and scams happening just with paper. I mean, with paper notes, you had fraudulent banknotes, you had fraudulent checks. So if there's a technology or there's a new way of doing something, trust me, there's someone who's thinking how you can muck up the process and score off it and scam it, right? So that's always been there. So no matter what you implement, there's always going to be that security risk. And that's then part of the process of going to say, well, you know, same as the science community is great at this, peer review. You come up with something and you think this is great. It's your responsibility to have the people criticize it and find the holes with it. And that's the same thing that's got to happen. Anything that changes digitally, any new wave that comes along, it's for the community in the technology sector to get together and say, how do we make sure this is secure? How do we make sure this can't get defraudulated? And actually work together. That's the one thing that I do feel that the IT industry, ICT, IS industry, whatever you want to call it, computer sciences industry, there's still a bit too much competitiveness at times, and where we do need to be working together, that's not there. And around the topic of security and securing online transactions and securing all of that, I do feel we need to all collaborate together and work together, because there are definitely malicious people out there that are looking for every opportunity to take advantage of it. But that's always been there, time immemorial. You go back as far as you want in the history, there's always been someone who's been looking how to scam something.
That's unfortunately the reality. Yes, Alison?
Joanne, if I can just add to that, I agree with what the guys are saying. I don't think this thing will stop as a result of fraud, but fraud is a massive concern. And if I can say, I came across an article, I think it was Business Day, reporting that over 50% of all complaints to our banking ombudsman are around fraud, right? And we work with a lot of banks in South Africa and globally. It's a massive concern. They're throwing huge resources at it. It's not just fraud, it's also money laundering, a number of different sort of nefarious activities. And I think part of upskilling yourself today in terms of digital literacy is familiarizing yourself with the availability of tools and techniques and figuring out what you can do for your business and for your family and for your own education and that of your kids. But part of it is you have to have also a bit of a sort of a digital literacy around fraud and what is, you know, phishing attacks and so on, because I actually think it's more prevalent than people think. And I think that even very highly educated sort of experienced people are sometimes being defrauded. It's not necessarily just very sort of illiterate people. I think that's incorrect. I think fraud is happening across the board. Part of being aware today and being in this game is to actually take stock and to make yourself responsible for your own behavior so that you can try and de-risk these activities.
And let me bring you in here, Casper. I think this is a very good question from Jacques, such a human question, actually. Some digital transformation is great, He says, but I've had some experiences, most recently with a certain satellite TV provider, where I just want to speak to a human being. Are there some areas that should rather maintain that human contact? And it says to me that I think many businesses are grappling with this, the balance between, how digitized that their response to customers should be, and whether they do actually want to hear a human voice on the other side.
So one day I was sitting across Rem Ackerman's desk with him, and he told me, remember one thing, if you have a PAX, put the people through a voicemail service. Now, to the phone our company, we absolutely get a voicemail or voice direct service. I believe it's so easy because with artificial intelligence, you can now find that. So with small business, it's easy to handle queries, right? But as we grow, and if we want to grow fast, there's no way you can handle one call at a time or one query at a time. Again, the example where you now engage with your company via WhatsApp.
Right. So we're going to quickly, Casper, we just see this is sometimes the drawback of digital, right? Technology occasionally lets us down. So Casper, we're just going to unmute your mic quickly and or rather mute you and unmute you, and let's just see if that improves whether we can hear you or not. Do you want to try again, Casper?
Let's try this much better. The key success factor.
Yeah, we're still having a bit of a problem with that, Casper. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Kevin to take that one before, while we try and sort out your connectivity there. Kevin, this is part of the reality of digital, right? But often, as Casper I think was saying, you've got to be able to distinguish between situations in which you need to hear the voice of a person on the other side of a phone versus just having to deal with the digitized sort of voice.
Absolutely. So as an example, we at Triple4, we built a speech analytics platform that uses AI, like Casper was starting to talk down, to identify how negative the sentiment is and how seriously someone needs to talk to someone. And this is then an application of that. And I totally sympathize with Jacques' question, because there's been so many times where I'm just, you queuing through voice prompts and you've pushed one twice and put your ID number in 3 times with hashes and everything. And you're just like, you know what, I just want to talk to someone now. So yes, there's that. And then this comes back to what I said before. If you're a 100% customer centric business, perhaps that's the one area of your business that you don't digitally transform. You could do all the other stuff, but maybe if that is key to your business and that's your key business metric is customer satisfaction, customer retention, and sorting out frustrations first time, and that's part of your mission vision, then, and your value system, then don't digitally transform that. Create the call center, employ the people to answer the calls and handle that, but digitally transform and create efficiencies elsewhere in the business. Doesn't mean that you don't have to do it, but just be selective about where you do it.
So Kevin, I'm going to stay with you for the moment because we're wrapping up now. So I want an extremely brief comment from each of you on the issue of what it takes to make that first step, right? If you're someone who's watched this webinar and you're convinced by the digital experts that we presented today that this is what you need to do for your business, what is the first step, Kevin?
The first step is to get everybody at the highest decision level making tier of your business to agree that you need to do something. Get the total buy-in. Because if only 3 people believe in this and the other 2 say no, you're never going to get the synergistic thing happening at the top layer. You're never going to have that combined unified front that's prepared to drive it pervasively through the business. So that's where you need to start. And then once you've got that buy-in, then start engaging and talking and listening and everything else.
Well, thank you so much for that, Kevin. Alison, quick one for
So
you.
I think that it starts with awareness of what's possible. And if you're very outside this game, you don't even know what you don't know. And so what we often do with our clients is we construct immersions, which is so let me just explain that. We introduce them to different types of companies who are really getting this right. Companies in different sectors, sometimes even competitors, but we literally bring them together almost like sort of we arrange tours where they can literally see what it looks like if you digitize this aspect of the business, digitize a manufacturing line or a call center, or how they've done the analytics on their website and digital marketing. So we bring executives and leadership teams. And you know, it doesn't just mean the CEO, it can be right down to sort of leadership of different areas of the business. We bring them into sort of settings where they can actually meet and go and almost have site visits with other companies. Now, we're arranging that for sort of our large customers, and we do that globally, but you can do that for yourself. So if you think that I don't know anything about this, find someone who does and go and start to ask them what they're doing in their business and ask them if they'll show you. Find a friend, find a cousin, reach out to somebody. I think we're all quite excited. The people who are excited about this are often willing to share, maybe even too much. So find somebody who gets it and is doing that, and go and have a look so that you understand what's possible. And if you go and do that across a bunch of different businesses, you can then come back to your senior team and say, or hopefully they've all gone on that adventure with you, but you can all come back and say, right, we now at least know what's out there and what's possible. Now let's make choices about how we're going to prioritize where we start and what to do first to get those quick wins. But you have to expose yourself and become aware of the art of the possible.
Thank you so much for that, Alison. I'm hoping technology is not going to let you down, as I said the last say here, Casper.
Yes. So Kevin and Alison is spot on. The one I would like to add is your customer. The day of your customer to come to you and your customer to use your system in your way is gone. You need to go to your customer. If you think your customer's phone today, they don't want to go and download your app so they can speak to you and have to kind of figure out your works. Don't WhatsApp, don't SMS. They want you to come to them. So your mindset is to start, after you've got the exact buying, after you know what's happening, your mindset has to be, what my customer wants. You have to literally go to them in their means, in their channel, and then offer the services in their way. The voice call example is ways where literally in 20 seconds, the chat can pick up. You need to speak to someone, and they say, I've got someone available for you. So previously you went 5 minute call and then got frustrated because it's buttons. Now in 20 seconds in chat, you're ready for a few questions. So when now someone speaks to you, you don't have to tell them your mobile number, because you know your mobile numbers, things like that. So I believe you have to literally go to your customer and give them what they need in their space, in the world, in their comfort zone, which means give them back time. Our philosophy, we give back time, so they have more time for families, for friends, for community involvement, and for life, and to go on. So I believe
Casper, thank you. I'm going to leave it there because we still have a bit of a bad line to you, but let me just recap what you said there. Casper very astutely saying, of course, that you need to go out there into your customer's space, essentially, and go into their comfort zone, take your business to them, free them up so that they're not tied up with all the admin around these business solutions, and make their lives easier so they're able to do more, essentially. And that's the advantage of having the kind of digital convenience that all of you are talking about. I want to thank our fantastic panel this morning. We really had a wonderful discussion. It's been a great pleasure being with all of you and digging into your insights and getting some really valuable information out of you. Thank you, Alison Jacobson, Kevin Mortimer, and Casper de Vries for your valuable insights there. I'm really grateful to all of you who watched the session this morning as well and asked some really pertinent questions. A special thank you to Clickatell and Triple4 for partnering with Business Day Focus 4.0 for this live discussion. And of course, unfortunately, we were not able to get all the questions asked that you wanted asked. And I have a sense from some of the questions and comments that have come through that you as business owners want to engage individually with some of the people on our panel today. So of course, a thank you mailer goes out, and I'm sure we can make some of those important details available for you should you want to continue the discussion offline. Of course, the full webinar will also be available on the Arena Events website. So that's where you can watch it if you've missed parts of it, or if you'd like someone you know to have a look at this. And thank you so much for that. Casper de Villiers, did I call you Casper de Vries? It's because you have such a great sense of humor. I apologize for that. Thank you very much, Casper de Villiers, for being one of the individuals on this important panel today. Thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are in the world today. Take care. Have a great day.